Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I am your host, Ricky Camilleri. Anyone who has lived in a city, especially New York City, long enough knows that the construction, the traffic, the yelling, the subways, the bike bells, the sirens, the general lack of silence anywhere you go can drive you out of your damn mind. In the new film, The Sound of Silence, Peter Sarsgaard plays a house tuner, a man that looks for rhyme and reason to the sounds of our lives. Let's take a look.
Why do people act the way they do? Why do people feel the way they do? There's a reason.
According to Peter Lucian, the silence is full of sound. Depression, anxiety, fatigue are triggered by the sonic details of our homes.
I guess you're Peter. I'm Ellen. I am always tired. Exhausted, actually.
Stick out your tongue. I can see things on your tongue that can help me.
Kitchen. E flat.
Weird, but kind of sexy. Is he single?
Are you serious?
Sound influences the way that people connect with each other. They may not even know it. Radiator is contributing to your anxiety.
Hey, Peter. God, this probably sounds so strange.
Your feelings continue.
Yes, my feelings continue.
Maybe I could come by next week.
So, did Peter tune your apartment?
Upper East Side. E flat toaster bubble.
Like to think I have better qualities than that to describe me.
Hopefully you feel a little more comfortable with me by now.
Of course.
I'm just cautioning you not to make it too personal. We have to be careful.
You must be the house tuner.
Our clients are Fortune 500 creatures. I'm offering you an opportunity, Peter.
You can do so much with this. Urban design, architecture, home products.
We're big admirers of Peter here.
They pick everything apart.
You think my research is faulty?
I think all this is just too much. It's not for me.
It can be difficult to talk about a relationship problem.
What about you? How do you trust yourself?
There are all these connections. There's something deeper at work. Sounds that guide people through the city. I mean, they're not conscious of it, but it's there.
I called you.
I listened.
Everybody, please welcome Ben Nabors, Michael Tyburski, and Peter Sarsgaard. Guys, thank you so much for being here. Congratulations on this film, a beautiful film and a really beautiful performance at the center of it. One that I think a lot of actors would have taken and made cheeky and made extremely sort of deadpan and over the top. And I love that you play it very seriously and you take this man's plight.
It's very serious. I'm just stuck on like weird and sexy from that trailer. I'm still processing that.
Was it not something that you felt as this character?
Sexy. Can I just have sexy? You know, this topic is something that I've felt since I was a kid on some level and been aware of my feelings for it. I'm sure it's something we all feel, but you know, to be aware that that's what's causing it is something else. And I've always sought out a sound environment that I want to be in the same way that some people would do like the lighting in a room, you know.
What have you found the sound environment that you prefer to be in is? You are a city dweller.
Yeah, the natural world obviously is much easier, you know, because somehow nature times out everything in a way that's pleasing. Yeah. Unless you're under a mockingbird or something like that. But
then it's like, how can you get mad? It's a mockingbird. That's a great. They're very nice.
You should move. It's asking you to move.
Ben, Michael, can you talk about the collaboration on this? It came from a short film, correct? So how did this start? Where did the idea initially begin, and how did it blossom into this?
Yeah, well, it goes back kind of more years than I like to admit, because we've been working on this one thing, Ben and I, for quite a few years, and it started on my end when Ben sent me a short story that he wrote that was titled Palimpsest, which was the working title for this feature for a long time. And it had a character who was doing a lot of things in New York, kind of odd jobs, and the one that I was most interested in and stuck out to me is I guess I'm always interested in odd jobs of sorts and subcultures, people who are kind of beating to their own drummer. He had kind of the sketch of this character called the house tuner, who did very much, what Peter does in the film. And right away I could just kind of picture something about like a tweed jacket and a guy with a satchel coming in. And I love the idea of someone showing up at your door and saying that they can, cure your anxiety or any sort of like emotional issue. But so that character really stood out to me, and Ben and I adapted that story into a short film that we premiered at Sundance in 2013, and then we, slowly over the course of a year, naturally evolved it into a feature. We realized there was a lot more to that character that we wanted to, I suppose we didn't necessarily want to tell an origin story of that character by any means, but we wanted to expand the world, and we had a lot of kind of interest in talking about sound phenomena and sound history of New York City, which has a lot of kind of interesting anecdotal things that we found in our research, and we thought that character was a great conduit to explore the theme of sound and how New Yorkers especially relate to it and cope with it in a lot of ways.
I love that bit of footage that you have. What time period is that there?
Yeah, so in the film we have a clip that Ben and I found when we were researching. It's from 1929. It was this group of gentlemen called the Noise Abatement Commission who went around New York. They were commissioned by the Department of Health in the city to record the din. Ben found that the decibel level was a new form of data measurement at the time, so they were recording how loud the city was. They determined that Times Square and the area formerly known as Radio Row, where the World Trade Center became, were the loudest in the city. And that's about it. And they saw the problem and then produced a beautiful pamphlet that showed this data, but didn't fix it at all. And so I guess I like to think that
it can't be fixed.
It only gets worse.
I think they published just before the Great Depression, and people stopped worrying about sound for a little while.
Right. I actually think now that we have iPhones with earpieces in them, and you see everyone on the subway and around the city walking around with their own soundtrack, I'm afraid that the sound is just going to get way worse because no one's even listening to it anymore. There's no one to have a problem with it, especially if they can get like noise canceling that cancels out like a jackhammer.
The sound of New York is, for me, can be so intense sometimes because like the sort of buildings that keep getting built up around, it feels like this intense sound of progression that just does not stop no matter where anything is in the world or in your personal life. It feels like everything is just plowing forward, and the sound is kind of a part of that. Not a question, just the way that it makes me feel.
Greenwood Cemetery, if you want some peace.
Do you go hang out in this?
Yeah.
I'm curious, it might be a shallow reference, but I was wondering if you did at all think about or talk about The Conversation, the Coppola film, which is not necessarily about the sounds of the city in this way, but is about a man who deals with sound, the sound of the city, and projects a certain amount of confidence that in actuality he is kind of missing.
Yeah, it's funny. I hadn't admittedly seen that film until after I made the short, and everyone kept on referencing it, and then that I properly educated myself and fell in love with it. And I'm obsessed with that movie. But at the same time, it's a much different film. That's kind of the gold standard for cinema for me in a lot of ways in that era. But we certainly were referencing things like production design when we were looking for specifically Peter's character in the movie. He works his kind of tuning lab, as we call it, as a former Cold War era fallout shelter that exists in basements in Manhattan. And that film had a lot of good kind of tonal references in terms of the way they made that environment.
The production design for that fallout shelter was amazing. I mean, it was it's an actor. When you walk into a space that's been really well designed, it's like your job has been done for you.
Yeah, we had a great art department team on this movie, and we really tried. I was really gunning to shoot in an actual fallout shelter, but it's more complicated production-wise to get equipment in and to secure those locations. So it was our one kind of set that we built from the ground up in the movie, and they modeled it after these actual fallout shelters that we went into. But yeah, the Conversation is a great touchstone. We definitely had some of that score playing on set too to kind of get us in that kind of rabbit hole headspace.
For people not in New York, the fallout shelters are very common throughout pre-war buildings in the cities. And they're basically converted basements, but they're largely subterranean, very quiet, and really insulated, which came to be like a theme for the character.
Can you talk about developing the script? I mean, so much of the script and the characters are their relationship to sound, whether it's anxiety or trying to sort of master and figure out the chaos of sound. What was that like for you as a writer? How do you do that research? Is that putting yourself in a place where sound is going to make you anxious and writing down your feelings and then bringing that into Rashida Jones's character or some other aspect for Peter's character?
The character really came from an anxious place, to be honest. I was in a noisy apartment in Washington Heights. It had a radiator heating system, which in New York, people are familiar with that. It's this particular high-pitched squeal sometimes. And it was
bang, bang.
Or a clanking pipe.
Bang.
And I think everybody has their own sound and relationship
banging.
with it. And it was driving me crazy. And I was starting to think about what kinds of crazy I was feeling, and then particularly if those noises were relating to specific notes, if those notes could correspond to the way a composer would choose to write a song. So like what emotions those notes could trigger.
Well, like the difference between minor keys and major keys. I mean, to me, that's like, as someone who enjoys music, that's like a fact that they relate to different feelings in me. Maybe I don't. It's difficult when you talk about actual notes, because I don't have perfect pitch. So to me, notes only exist in relationship to other notes. You know, this guy must have some type of perfect pitch.
Ben?
Yeah. But in thinking about like how noises might be affecting the people that the house tuner would interact with in the film, I don't know. There's people in New York have a lot of issues, so I guess there was a lot to pull from. In a place like this, an unusual profession like Peter's could really be a service people.
I think also we live in a time where there's all sorts of industries popping up like this, where people say like, what's really bothering you is the black mold. So, and obviously black mold is good for no one, but you know, there's like entire industries where people like come in and clean up your house and take out the radio waves or whatever. All of this stuff is what's making you feel bad. When, I would argue that it might be other stuff that's going on inside of you that's the real issue.
People talk about energy all the time, good energy and bad energy, or
Sure,
a certain
sure.
sort of undercurrent vibration.
I have these magnets in my mattress, whatever it is.
Yeah. It's a sort of a byproduct of not really understanding new age developments that much, but like having them around in the periphery, and sort of plucking from it here and there.
Yeah, and then, just like in our film, there'll be like some guy who's really interested in this in like kind of a geeky, myopic way, and then some big company goes in and goes like, that's a great idea, sound therapy. We'll do that, and we'll have spas all over the city where you can come in and get washed by clean sound or something.
Can you talk about the performance and calibrating it for the specific moment that happens to him, without spoiling anything, at the end of the film, how he changes and getting him to that place, because you definitely don't create a character who right off the bat seems like he could. I mean, he's hiding something, but we don't even really know exactly what he's hiding.
I know, and I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about what I was hiding or actively hiding anything. I spent a lot of time thinking about like trying to make how other people were feeling and trying to make them feel better. So, if you take the pressure off of yourself as an actor and put it onto the other person, and I look at Rashida and I think like, okay, well, she's thinking about something else. She's not thinking about me because maybe she's anxious. Maybe she's anxious because that toaster's a B flat. Toaster's a B flat. And so for a lot of the movie, it's really all about other people, other things. And then only at a couple of points in the movie does it get turned back on me. And then those times are like having to reflect for a person who's never reflected before. It's like the beginning of the journey. It's like, oh, me? Oh, and then, really profoundly like I want to succeed, and that's important to me. And the scene with Austin Pendleton and wanting to get things published and all of that. But I really think it's not even that much about ego. It's about the work.
Yeah.
I'm so into what I'm doing, and I think it's so important that the world see it. So I'm really playing someone who has much less of an ego than people I normally play. You know, really much less of a defined self in some ways. Somebody who hasn't spent a lot of time going like, who am I? You know?
Or has an extremely defined self, but that definition is one that has nothing to do with his interior life.
Yeah.
Or any sort of self-awareness.
I wear a tweed jacket.
Right. Because it makes people think that I'm comfortable and
I look professional. If I showed up wearing shorts and a t-shirt, nobody would take this shit seriously. I gotta like, you know, look like, I think that's what I'm doing. That's why I wear this stuff, you know. A sweater under a jacket with a button-down collar, I'm good.
There's a very specific tone to the film, for lack of a better word, excuse me. But even when he starts to unravel a little bit, and I think about the scene with Rashida in the apartment looking out on the city, and there are questions finally being turned back around on him. He doesn't, the way that he gets upset, he doesn't flip out. He doesn't lose it. And so you as a director and you as a writer sort of have to present that there is a shift happening without too much actually sort of being readable, I think, in some degrees for the audience. Can you talk about that? Because he doesn't necessarily say, don't talk about me. He just kind of, it's a face that Peter makes where you can see he's a little more uncomfortable. Thank you.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that scene that you're referencing directly is just one of those great moments for a director where you bring on the right talent and you just get to watch. On the page, I think, you know, Ben and I mapped that scene out, that there's a challenge that, you know, Peter is confronted in a really direct way finally by this client, and he is at that moment where, you know, he's having that crisis of faith. Like, is this thing that I've you know, believed in my whole life, worth, you know, pursuing, or to continue down this path that has so many holes in it and is falling apart, or am I going to kind of toe that line a little bit more? And
there was also the scene with the woman that I idolized, whose name I don't remember, and you know, I go to see her speak, and I think that she's going to remember me afterwards and all of that. That scene was a real tipping point for me when we were filming. That was probably the first time when we were filming where I went like, oh my God, this character has a really big interior life that apparently wants to speak, and I hadn't thought about it. You know what I mean? In the same way that the character disassociates, I just disassociated the whole thing, and I was as surprised as anyone. I remember at the end of the scene, I just like walked off and walked down this hallway and went into a bathroom, and I think you were like, "What's going on?" And I was like, "I just gotta go to the stall and you know, hang out for 45 minutes and get back to normal."
What's interesting about that scene is that his fear at first is that she doesn't remember him, and it doesn't seem like she does, but then she does, and it's even worse that she does remember me. Like his fear is realized in a completely different way. She's like, oh yeah, you. Oh God.
You.
Yeah. But I'm always curious about tonal decisions like that, like in that scene or in the apartment, where as storytellers you can go a number of different ways in terms of how this is going to play for the audience, but making the very distinct decision to play it as softly as sort of a lot as the movie has led to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, I mean, I think a lot of it is people have been describing Peter's character as kind of monastic. I've heard a lot, which I think is interesting. But I think tonally, I certainly always wanted this movie to feel like it was from Peter's character's point of view, you know, to not only see New York the way he sees it, but also hear, you know, sonically, that was important to us. And, you know, he's a guy who's methodical and has a rhythm, and yes, dresses a certain way to make people feel comfortable, but also you come off as, you know, he's so scientific, even though he's not a scientist, in the way his dialect and the way he, you know, his mannerisms, that people take him more seriously. So I just wanted to kind of be on that wavelength, for lack of a better word.
I love the strip. I mean, he would give me great character things all the time. He'd be like, when you come in, I think you should have a whole routine when you enter into the house. And one of the things I think you should do is take this little strip and put it at the bottom of the door so that sound won't come from under the door. And so then I was like, oh, right, that's great. And then so I had an entire routine, which ended with me feeling a little bit like Mr. Rogers. I would like take off my shoes and put them aside and put on these slippers. And I was like, wow, this is what this guy's life is. So a lot of times you get character stuff from your director in a very interesting way. He was very sure he wanted this like strip. And I was like, okay. And it just evolves from there, you know.
Ben, you were going to say something?
Oh, yeah, I was going to speak to that scene you're mentioning when you're talking specifically about tone. I mean, we wanted to develop a scene where both characters have a confrontation of their worldviews. And for those that haven't seen the movie, at that moment, Rashida's character, Ellen, hears herself say the things that she has had others say to her prior to Peter. So the kind of premise of the movie is, of course, Ellen looking to solve her problem by engaging Peter. And finally, in this moment, when she kind of gets Peter's diagnosis and understands his larger theory, she has an opportunity to hear herself say what she needs to hear. I guess that was a really important thing for us with regards to her being kind of self-actualized, not being prescribed something that she had to follow, but instead hearing her own self say what she needed. And I think that is really what structured the tone there, too, because it was an unusual kind of confrontation. It wasn't being told something as much as being awoken to an idea.
Right, she's not intentionally confronting him. She is coming to this in the moment as well, and is basically asking a question. And it's not a question to put him off or confront him in any way. It's just a curiosity in that moment that ends up sort of channeling something within him that was unexpected. How has making this movie changed your relationship to sound and the city?
I mean, I'm certainly, I've always been, I suppose, hyper aware of sound. This movie certainly didn't help that, but at the same time, I think what I like about this movie at a base level is just I want audiences to be more aware of sound. I think it's we can't ignore it, and we all have coping mechanisms like Peter referenced. People walk around with headphones and you drown things out. But I walked 20 blocks to get here this morning, and I'm passing jackhammers on the street, and I'm like instinctively I'm covering up my ears. Why am I doing that? How is that going to affect my mood for the day? And I think whether we like it or not, sound, we all have a relationship, and it's subconsciously or consciously affecting you. And to be aware of it, I think, is a good thing.
There are parts of the city where I love the sound. There's this tunnel in Prospect Park where there's this guy who tap dances, and then you come out of that, and there's like the sound of kids skateboarding along this one little section that like, and then they mess up the trick, they like never land. And then, you go further out into the park, and there's just the sound of people like playing a game, like soccer, frisbee, or something. And I sort of love the sounds of the park and going from one group to another. The West African and Caribbean people on the other side of Prospect Park that have a drum circle. I guess you can sort of find it in the parks and the people, but I even like the sound of the screaming subways sometimes in the morning. It's like my day's starting with that like, I think instead of being troubled by it, I start to get into the flow of it.
I was just thinking the same thing, yeah. It almost hurts more to be troubled by it or to sort of cover your ears and to try to stop it.
Take out the headphones, be a part of it, interact with the city. You've chosen to live here. Go with it.
I agree. Now, a couple questions from the audience. Who's a question?
Hi there. You mentioned actually liking the sounds of the city. I wonder if there's any sounds that are kind of like nails on chalkboard that you just cannot stand, that just get under your skin. That's for everybody.
You can't just go with it.
I have one. The 456 platform at Union Square is one of the worst sounds in the city, in my opinion. And that's the one with the metal gates that kind of come out to meet the train. It's pretty horrific.
Yeah, the New York ambulances and fire trucks have a certain pitch that is very irritating. But when you go to other cities like Europe, suddenly it's as invasive, but for some reason it's more melodic and pleasant.
I think that might be because we're not as familiar. I don't know. There's
Perhaps,
something romantic about a European siren, maybe.
I like a European siren also. They're not coming from me.
We're just a bunch of romantics.
Yeah, no, I have a real problem with where I live in Brooklyn, there's lots of people with small babies. And the crying baby thing, because I'm a parent, means help, And if I'm not able to, it's someone else's kid, and they're just crying, and they're pushing them, that drives me crazy. So I guess human noise
I go horns honking, and it's not when there's like a huge traffic jam and there's a lot of horns. It's like when you can tell it's one guy who's just being
Faster.
an asshole.
Hey, faster.
And you just kind of want, that's the thing that gets on my nerves. Like, oh, it's just you being a jerk. Like, just hang out for a minute and all of this will go away. You don't need to bother us.
Sure, or you're just in one of those things, but you're behind a garbage truck, and that's just your unlucky day.
That's usually not the sound. That's just like the nightmare. You know? One more question.
Hi. I wanted to ask if there is any songs that bring you guys back to like a specific place, because I feel like that ties into the fact that sound really affects like how we're feeling.
That's interesting.
Yeah, there's one song that I love that I use in this movie that now is I will forever be nostalgic about making this movie and a certain feeling I had that we played on set a lot. It's this piece performed on the theremin by Clara Rockmore that was recorded many years ago. Yeah, and it's I think the theremin is often associated with sci-fi and kind of eerie, ethereal sound, but I think it can be really beautiful at the same time.
She was the only person that was able to play it any other way, I think.
She was the best, the virtuoso.
Yeah. It's an instrument that's only really had one virtuoso. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to go with the way that sound will really bring you back to a relationship. My first girlfriend, her name was Robin. She really liked the group Styx. I'm Sailing Away is the song that she put on a mix for me when we broke up and she went to the University of North Carolina and I went to school someplace else. And if I hear that song on the radio, I don't like the song, but it definitely I'm like, she's breaking up with me.
Wait, she put that, she was like, I'm breaking up with you. Listen to I'm Sailing Away.
I'm sailing away.
It's somewhat sadistic.
I'm like, also the song is just sappy and lame, and I'm like, ah. Sure.
Mine is less relationship oriented. But when we were writing the script, we listened to a lot of Moondog, who is this kind of street composer, now deceased, but was a wild character of New York, and he really played the city quite well. So he was a real touchstone of what the score could sound like. Yeah. Check him out.
Guys, congratulations on the film. Thank you so much for being here and talking to me about it. It comes out tomorrow, right?
Tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night. Everybody give them a huge round of applause. One more time.